Welcome to the Rob Seco Field Ready Podcast with your host, Jim Robinson.
Hello and welcome back to the Rob Seco Field Ready Podcast. I'm your host, Jim Robinson. Harvest is moving along rapidly, but there's still much to be done. So much so that we have to put in long hours and prioritize what gets done when. To talk to us about some of those considerations, we have Kris Laub and Nate Meyer here joining us. Welcome, guys.
Hi, Jim.
Hey, Nate. Kris, welcome.
Hi, Jim. How are you?
Doing well. So, Kris, this is your first time on the show with us. Could you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about who you are and where you're from.
Sure. Then thanks for having me on, Jim. I appreciate it. So, Kris Laub. I am a DSR with Rob Seco. I actually live in Johnston, Iowa, and cover about a 6-county territory based around central Iowa. I grew up in a small town named Rippey, Iowa, which is about 35 miles northwest of Des Moines. Grew up on the farm, and we still have a small farming operation today. And I've been in the seed business, I'm pushing almost 25 years.
Excellent. Well, welcome to the show. And the first question I have for you is, how is harvest progressing in your area?
So harvest is pushing right along, especially in soybeans. I would say that the soybean crop is probably 60 to 70% harvested around central Iowa. There's been very little corn taken out, mainly early varieties for guys who maybe hadn't started soybeans yet, to get that out of the field and run through the dryer bin maybe. But so very little corn at this point. The soybeans have been exceptional, which is a bit surprising due to the fact that we were so dry this summer. And I think it kind of goes back to what we've always talked about is all you really need are a timely rain here and there, and you can raise a really good crop. We're probably setting all-time records on a lot of farms here in central Iowa with the range probably 65 to 85 bushels per acre, which really isn't that typical for central Iowa. The corn-on-corn fields, there were a lot of corn-on-corn fields that have been rotated this year due to the derecho a year ago, and those fields have been in the mid to upper 80s. So it's just absolutely something we just don't see. Maybe one of those once-in-a-lifetime type harvests. Very little disease, very little insect pressure. The one thing that has stood out to me is how well the E3 soybeans have done this year. They've just been tremendous. Rob Seco, Initech variety IS 2089s and 2748s have just been showstoppers. They're just really showing their yield this year. It creates lots of happy customers with the E3 platform, and they're just it goes back to the tagline, right? They're safe, simple, and superior. These soybeans they're just a great product, and it's amazing how clean these fields are during harvest time that you just don't see a weed out there. So it's been an exciting year to harvest soybeans, and it's just shown the real power of having a good platform to use on your farm.
That's fantastic. Yeah, thank you for that. So Nate, you cover a little bit broader of a geography in general. You actually run from eastern Iowa all the way to the Rocky Mountains, and then actually down from Nebraska and Iowa through South Texas. Can you tell us a little bit about what you are seeing during harvest in that geography?
Sure, Jim. Well, obviously what you said there, it is a large geography. So I've seen anywhere this week from soybean fields in Nebraska that probably still have a week away before they're going to harvest to getting through Kansas, fully harvested corn, soybeans, sorghum, everything of that nature. So trends I've been hearing this year, a lot of people are surprised. Yields are a lot better than they expected earlier on. Like Kris said, the same thing, not a lot of disease pressure. We are seeing a little bit more rootworm pressure this year. So this is one thing we need to be on the lookout for is as we get further into the season, worrying about harvest, making sure we're getting the fields in order that we need to. Soybeans this year have been great. Like Kris said, the E3 varieties we have out there are surprising everybody. Yields have been, what I've been hearing in some of the irrigated stuff, 85, 90 bushels. Dryland stuff as we move up northern Nebraska, still very good in that 45 to 50 range where they were expecting maybe 30 to 35 bushels. So soybean yields have been great. Corn starting to roll off more, getting some plots back. Really happy with what I'm seeing there. Not a lot of stalk or root issues and really nice yields. So it's tough to give an update on everything, Jim, because this week I've been through Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, and New Mexico. So It's a big area, but so far everything's progressing really nicely.
No, for sure. You cover a lot of territory in your role as product evaluation lead, evaluating products, fields, and helping out agronomically. Now, I did just get back late last night from a trip up to South Dakota, Minnesota, and North Dakota to do a tour of a number of pre-commercial trials. And so I can actually give a little bit of an update on the northern territories and how those are looking harvest-wise. Beans are coming off really, really fast in the north, and in the vast majority of geographies, the yields are surprisingly high. I mean, a lot of western Minnesota, eastern South Dakota, eastern North Dakota were severely impacted by drought all through June into July, and were rescued more or less by some August rains that really put on a lot of yield into the soybeans. So the soybeans are actually coming in around normal yields. In some cases, we're hearing of exceptional yields, yields in the 80s and 90s, which is really unheard of in a lot of those parts of the world. Corn-wise, corn is actually moving really fast, and not necessarily for a great reason. Across much of those geographies that were impacted by drought, it accelerated especially the earlier hybrids in their time to maturity. And so they finished up a little bit faster. They're starting to get harvested now. Yields are probably a little bit more disappointing because the corn and those early hybrids weren't able to take advantage of the later rains. Now, full season hybrids in those areas are doing better, but still not what we were seeing 2 years ago, 3 years ago for all-time high yields. But harvest is moving along really rapidly, and I think we're going to see a lot more beans coming off, and actually to the point where it may impact the overall price, commodity price of beans, and corn probably a little bit short of plan up there. We're looking at a lot of things going on during harvest, and Kris, I'd like you to talk to us just a little bit about safety when it comes to harvest. People can get tired as they're putting in long hours. There's big equipment. There's a lot going on, a lot of moving pieces, and really a lot of things that can go wrong. So, Kris, could you tell us what safety considerations we should take into account during harvest?
Absolutely. So I have some firsthand knowledge of this. We do run and I'm still involved with a family farming operation around Rippey, and it's always something you keep in mind. One of the things we always do is we kind of have a checklist of things that we want to check, obviously before harvest, but even during harvest, to make sure that the machines are operating at the capacity that they have the ability to do, making sure things are in order. So things, you don't have those breakdowns, right? Because no one wants a breakdown during harvest. So just keeping up on the maintenance and checking equipment every day on what things could be going on that need to be fixed, so you don't have downtime when you really don't want it. We also always keep the manuals in the combines and in the tractors. We're always checking those to make sure things are set right. We have somewhat of a plan together, put together, that if something does happen, here's what we're going to do. Always think of things that possibly could happen. The other thing we try to do is always pre-harvest, take care of things like tree limbs and things like that could be in the way during harvest, that could slow you down, or that could cause damage to machinery. So, then you don't have to worry about those things when you get into the full-blown heat of the battle, when you really want to be out there and put some long hours in. Yeah. The other thing that we're really adamant about is if we have someone new that's going to come on the farm, or maybe it's someone that just comes up on the weekends that wants to help out, we always make sure we train them. They know exactly how the machines work. They know exactly what to do and what not to do. Just want to make sure they're very, very instructed on what the things to do, and especially the things not to do, right? Because there's just a lot of moving parts, and it's a very dangerous time of year.
Right.
We also, we harp about it, and I don't have any young kids anymore, but, we used to always, when the kids were out there, be very cognizant of when kids are around, what they're doing, because it's everyone's worst nightmare to have something happen to a child during harvest or during any time of the year. So we always we talk about those things, and I think it's really important for families that have young children. If they're like my boys, they just love to come out and see the big machines working and be around it. But it's such a dangerous thing to be around. Just being really cognizant of what's going on, and if they're around.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
The other thing that you really feel this time of year, Jim, as you well know, is just the fatigue of being in a machine all day long for day after day. One of the biggest things we talk about is, if we get tired or you feel fatigued, we'll stop and we'll take a break, or we'll go do something else for a little while. And obviously it's easier to say that than actually do it. But if you feel tired, you probably should stop and maybe take some time to do something else, just so you can regather your thoughts and make sure you don't make a silly mistake, because obviously that it just takes one of those and it can have a very bad result.
Absolutely.
These combines and most machinery, they have such an awesome lighting system on them anymore. We make sure that everything has lights on it. If we're going to run at night, that we can see what we need to see, but just to make sure those things are where they should be. Obviously, we're filling grain bins this time of year, and you probably don't have as much worry of grain collapsing this time of year, because you're really putting it in there. But obviously, that's one of the most dangerous things to do as well. But even being around augers, we make sure our safety shields are all on there. Never operate or do any type of maintenance on an auger while a tractor's running, just to be very, very cautious about grain bins, because we know how dangerous they can be. Getting entangled in an auger, that type of thing can really, really change a person's day, right?
Absolutely.
So we just try to be very cautious. There's just a lot of things that can go wrong, just especially if you're tired. So we just try to stay on top of those things and make sure that everyone has that plan and knows, the things to do and not to do, and just hopefully we have a safe harvest that way.
Perfect. No, thank you for that. Those are really good points. And, the last thing anybody wants to hear about is, or have happen is, a loved one, a friend, a coworker getting hurt on the job. And then, it's just not a good thing. So paying attention to all those different aspects is great. Now, Nate, harvest is a long, difficult, protracted job that can take quite a while. And with that, you just can't keep up with all the different things that have to get done. So, farmers have to prioritize how they finish up harvest. We're not quite halfway through harvest, nationally right now, but as we continue through, we're prone to see more and more harvest loss, field loss, whatever it might be. What should farmers do to prioritize the remainder of their fields?
Well, Jim, that's a good question. I think the number one priority they need to make is farm's a business, so they need to prioritize what fields they plan on making the most money on. So if they're looking at a hybrid that has great standability and they know that it's something that they can wait another week on, or they might have another hybrid in the field where it might have a little less standability, maybe it root lodges a little bit more, maybe the field itself is a little bit more prone to having disease or catching the wind at the wrong time, I should say. So they got to look at that. And one of the best ways to do that is to go back to the characteristic chart of the hybrids and take a look there. Is it a 7-8 for standability? Is it a 7-8 for roots? Knowing that usually means, hey, it can stand out in that field a little bit longer. If we get to a 6 and below, those are the ones that you need to start prioritizing for harvest. Those are the ones that, hey, let's get out there and get this one first. I know hybrid B is going to stand a little bit longer, so we got a little bit more time for that one. So that would be the best thing to do. And then you need to get out there and scout a little bit. I mean, we have some great products, but you know what? Nothing's immune to some diseases. So let's get out there, start pitching some stocks, kicking some stocks, seeing how much stock integrity is left in there. If you get out there and start pinching some stocks and, hey, they're starting to pinch really easy, you can, pinch right through them. It might be time to get the combine out there and get going. You're probably one big wind event away from having a big mess. So that's what I'd like to say there. So, you got to make sure that you're in the right yield, I'd say moisture range too. Year to year interactions with some hybrids, something might be drying down a lot slower than it has before, even if you've raised it there before. So knowing where that's at. So, but most farmers know their ground better than anybody else does. And so they know which fields they usually need to prioritize when it comes to whether it be disease, wind events, maybe it's something that holds a little bit more moisture through the year. So, but it's always best to just go back to the characteristic chart to kind of get an idea of that hybrid and then go take a look from there.
Exactly. And, there are times where even though you may want to wait until a hybrid dries down to 15.5 in the field, you may be better off financially harvesting it at 20 and just paying drying charges just to get that crop out of the field, harvested, because it may be a hybrid that's prone to root lodging, and it's a lot more difficult to pick it up off the ground than it is to get it now. So Kris, how can farmers use this harvest time right now to think about next year's cropping decision? I mean, when you're in the combine all day, every day, or hauling grain, whatever it might be, you see a lot as things are coming through that combine. What should they do to think about next year's cropping decisions?
That's for sure, Jim. And on top of agreeing with everything that Nate said, I mean, it's the end of the year, and the fruits of your labor are right in front of you, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I think there's several things that growers can do to plan for next year. One of those things would be, taking notes while you're in the combine, especially if there are any considerations that you want to keep in mind for next year. What did well where? What are there any special considerations with weed control in different areas? Did you have areas where there were escapes? It's kind of that. It's kind of a sitting at your office and watching the computer screen, right? So watch that yield monitor. Mm-hmm. Evaluate how hybrids and bean varieties did in different parts of the field, and obviously you can print those maps off after harvest, but it's different than actually being there and seeing it. So take notes. At Rob Seco, we try to do as good a job as we can, and we do a lot of training. A lot of back and forth, really coming up with recommendations on where hybrids and soybean varieties should be placed, mm-hmm. and our placement recommendations with population and those types of things. So pay special attention to it, because as far as next year, that helps out someone like myself when we sit down at the kitchen table, when we start talking about seed decisions for next year. Input from the farmer standpoint is as important as what you can help with as far as from the seed standpoint, right? Yep. Information, you can never have enough information. And so I try to really, really watch how things are doing. On the soybean side, one of the things that we would consider this year, we were right in the middle of the derecho last year, but there's a lot of volunteer in some of these fields, mm-hmm. Volunteer corn in some of these fields. So, will that cause any type of rootworm effect next year? Will they lay eggs in bean fields? I mean, we know that can happen, right? Yep. So we didn't have a lot of evaluation this year in cornfields in central Iowa, because there were a lot of farmers that just couldn't plant corn on corn this year due to the fact that they had to either disc it down, or there was just a lot of corn that was damaged, which in turn would cause a lot of volunteer corn, which obviously is very hard to control in corn. So, evaluate those fields. Think about if there was anything that you might have done different, because again, at the end of the day, there's a ton of power with knowledge of your fields, and that can help make decisions next year that can really help you produce a better crop, or even help with those areas that are very difficult to control. So knowledge is power, right? Exactly. And that helps us in all the decisions from our end.
No, that's great. And yeah, just to add to that, I mean, outside of your area, there were a lot of geographies that were heavily impacted by corn rootworm this year. And so, as you're riding in the combine, it's worth keeping a look, and you may see more lodging that's the result of corn rootworm than you had expected. So it might be time to take those notes and recognize that it's finally time to rotate that long time corn on corn field back to beans or whatever it might be. But just to summarize overall, so Kris, Nate, today we talked about harvest is coming along really rapidly. Things are looking better than expected in most geographies, especially for soybeans. And as we're going through harvest, we really need to keep in mind safety, because these are kind of the middle of harvest. It's only going to get tougher from here. You're going to get more tired. You're going to put in longer hours. It's getting dark earlier. So make sure all of your equipment is well maintained. You have all the manuals available. You're keeping your eyes open for people around you, people around the equipment. All the safety shields around the augers are going. Everybody's just paying attention to what they're doing. Get rest when you need rest, and continue with harvest. But also, as you're continuing with harvest, make sure you're prioritizing those fields properly. So which hybrids or which varieties are more prone to have field loss than others, and maximize your total revenue by going after those first, and maybe waiting a week on that hybrid or variety that has better standability and is less likely to lose yield during the harvest season itself. And as you're going, also take notes. It's really good to take notes to make decisions for next year, because you're not going to necessarily remember those in January when you're finalizing your seed buying decisions, or ultimately deciding what you're going to use for herbicides and what you have to tackle. So take those notes this year, figure out what you're going to do next year, but otherwise make sure you have a good, safe harvest season. Nate, Kris, thank you guys both so much for joining us.
Thank you, Jim.
Always a pleasure, Jim.
Thank you, guys. All right, well, as always, be sure to tune in on the 1st and 15th of every month for new episodes. And until then, stay field ready.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Rob Seco Field Ready Podcast. Join us next time to be field ready.
A Hurrdat Media Production.